Well, hello and welcome again to the Exponential Australia Church Leaders Podcast. We are delighted that you have joined us on the podcast today, and I am particularly excited for this conversation. As many of our listeners would know, we love to grapple with some of the big issues when it comes to church planting, multiplication, advancing the kingdom in our nation. And one of those significant issues, if we are going to be churches that plant churches, is generosity and finances, and the way that we are actually able to steward God's resources to do that well. And that is a great lead into introducing our guest today. We have on the podcast with me Martine Wilson from Generosity Path and Nick Wood from the Bridge Church in Kirribilli, Sydney, Australia. And we're going to be diving into how do we have these conversations, generosity. It seems to be one of those things that as Christians from time to time we can get quite awkward about. But Martine, Nick, it is wonderful to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for making the time.
Thanks, Charlie. It's really great to be here and with all the Exponential listeners.
Amazing. Well, Martine, I want to put a bit of a spotlight on you to start off with. You work for Generosity Path, which of course is a wonderful organisation, ministry that helps church leaders have conversations about these things, and we're going to dive into some of the prevailing issues. But tell us first a little bit about yourself, your journey, your life up until now, before we even start talking about this generosity stuff.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's a big question, but I'll keep it brief. I live in Melbourne, and so naturally I'm a coffee lover. My favourite is a magic, and I'm married to Andy, and we have 3 girls, beautiful girls, aged between 8 and 12. I had the immense privilege of growing up in a Christian home. And I met Jesus for myself as a teenager, going along to St. Hilary's Church in Kew. And it was there that I encountered Christians who were radically living out their faith. So people who were of all ages, young and quite old in life, wholly devoted to prayer and seeking God's kingdom in prayer. People who were giving up careers in Australia to move overseas and volunteer to serve in mission and ministry. Others also in tear fund circles who were seeking to live simply so that they could give more away to end extreme poverty. And so this really shaped me at that point in my life and how I wanted to use my life and be used by God. And yeah, so that really kind of, I guess, set me up for wanting to spend my adult life serving in church and parachurch ministry here in Australia and overseas. Yeah, but probably the most defining part of my story wasn't different roles that I've had, but it was a really beautiful, fresh encounter with Jesus that I had in October 2011, where God profoundly revealed the gospel afresh to me and really reoriented my heart. And I think it was really at that point that Philippians 3 verse 8 just really came alive for me, this idea of the surpassing worth of knowing Jesus and wanting to know him more, and that everything else, just wasn't that important to me anymore. So that really, that at that point, just really shaped how I wanted to live my life and serve him.
Love that. Thanks for giving us that introduction, Martine. And Nick, we're going to come to you in just a moment, but I guess there's no other way to begin to talk or confront this topic for today than to just say, generosity, Martine. Why do we get so hung up on it? Why is it such a big thing, both in the life of our churches, following Jesus? It's something that is both such a beautiful thing, and yet there's so many potential misconceptions and even bad experiences people may have had. Let's introduce this topic of generosity.
Yeah, you're so right, Charlie. I think, there's so many reasons why we get so hung up on that word or the topic of generosity. I think, there's just messages all around us that we need more. We need to acquire more. We need to be more in order to be happy. And also the messages of cost of living pressures. And so there's just a really strong scarcity mindset all around us. And so in the absence of us having solid conversations with Christian peers and teachings in our churches, those messages are much louder and more appealing to us, to be honest, compared to, just the really radically challenging words of Jesus on the topic of generosity and our hearts. So I think then, and you mentioned also, potential, damage that's been done when generosity might have been taught with pressure or an agenda in our churches. And so, I think there is often a tendency in churches to just avoid, let's just not go near this topic of generosity in case we push buttons. It's too hard. We don't want to be seen to be manipulating people or
That's great. I think you've opened up some great things that I look forward to. Obviously, as we dive more into this topic today, I wanted to emphasize again that one of the huge prevailing factors in the kingdom advancing in our nation is actually more generous followers of Jesus, people who are committed, sacrificial, have disarmed the idols of their heart because they want to see the kingdom advance in Australia. This is a church planting conversation. Like, if we're talking about generosity, it is a church planting conversation because, quite frankly, it's that scarcity mindset that I think you raised right at the beginning there, Martine, is that often we can bring to the church and to the ways that God would want to advance the kingdom in our nation a scarcity mindset. And yet, what would it look like for followers of Jesus to be lavishly generous, exorbitantly generous in order to advance the kingdom in our nation? And Martine, that's where I'd love to, I guess, jump in a wee bit to Generosity Path. For those who haven't heard about Generosity Path before, what is it? Tell us about its history. We're going to talk about, again, some of the tools that people may choose to use as they consider generosity in the life of their church. But tell us about the history of Generosity Path and, I guess, your role in it as well.
Yeah, sure. So Generosity Path started as quite a simple idea of some Christian friends wanted to create a safe space where they could actually talk about their faith and how they were using their money and their resources and their time for God's glory, and that they hadn't found a space where they could do that with friends and in their church. And so over time, it's grown into a global movement that helps people and churches to encounter God's radical love and generosity afresh and inspire them to live with open hands and see how generosity can heal our world. So that's pretty big goal that we have, and that we believe that generosity can heal our world. But fundamentally, we believe it's a discipleship, it's a formation issue. It's a heart posture. And so we want to see, we want to see people looking at the gospel afresh through the lens of generosity, seeing and marveling at what God has given up for us, what he's done for us. And then generosity just becomes an overflow, a natural way that we want to live out our faith and surrender to him. So what I'm doing is I'm overseeing our generosity movement in Oceania, seeking to encourage what's already there in various ways, but also seeking to do whatever we can to spark new movements of generosity across Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands.
Amazing.
Yeah, movements of generosity that see more people treasuring Christ than anything else. As you mentioned, Charlie, more funds and servants released to fund our church plants, to see neighbourhoods transformed by the local church, And then for unbelievers to see Christians and churches living radically different from the rest of the world and asking about that and wanting to know what's behind that and why do we care and why are we giving and spending our weekends serving them. So, that's what we want to see. I'm here. We're fully privately funded, I should say. So we're fully privately funded. We're not doing any fundraising. We just want to equip the church and disciple and mobilize people to get excited about this invitation God holds out to us as his people.
I think that's such an important part of the conversation though, Martine, is when the minute we start talking about money, there's this sort of question mark in our minds of like, what's your hidden agenda? Are you actually trying to get me to give to your thing? And, we've done at our church last year, the Journey of Generosity, the Generosity Path put together. And the most incredible part, I think, is it's this sense in which is someone speaking with a winsome and beautiful vision that actually doesn't demand anything from you. And I just think that we've seen has been so powerful because I do think so many of us know and believe the substance of the gospel, that God in love would give himself in love and just pour himself out in love, but we don't necessarily know how to connect the dots to the wealth piece or the way that I use my time piece or the vision for my life piece. And so there's just been this sense in which I think JOG is a really beautiful opportunity to say, hey, let someone else tell you about this, and that someone else is not going to ask you for anything. And that's just such an important part of how do we remove some of maybe the difficulties of even having the conversation.
Yeah. It's good. I want to talk in much more depth about the JOG because I think that's a tool that church leaders who might be listening today might definitely want to take advantage of. Before we talk a bit more about the Journey of Generosity for those who haven't heard of that before, and I think this is definitely both for Martine and for Nick as we talk about this. I'd love to kind of just dive a little deeper into, I guess, both helpful and unhelpful ways to talk about finances and generosity in the life of the church. Like, I think, there's people who you've seen do it wonderfully well, and maybe there's been other times we've been in church and we've gone, oh, that didn't go so well. Like, what are some? We'll ask you first, Martine, and your experiences, and then I want to come to Nick, particularly as they've been having some conversations about this recently at the Bridge. What are some traps that we can fall into? And I guess on the flip side of that, some kind of helpful frameworks when it comes to talking about generosity.
I think a trap is that fear of just not wanting to go there, being afraid of what it might trigger for people, rather than seeing it as an invitation. So we get the opportunity to participate in this higher agenda, greater agenda of what God's doing in the world. And all that we have actually is God's. Our time, the gifts that he's given us, the skills that we have, the connections and the influence that we might have, and our money and our resources. All that we have is God's. And to then invite people into this real conversation with God about, okay, so now this is all yours. I'm just your steward. How do you want me to use this to bring you glory and to advance your agenda, your kingdom here in my neighborhood, in my family, in my business, in my church? So, and that doesn't need to be apologetic. I mean, that's the core of our faith, hey, working out how do we live as Jesus' disciples in the unique context and with the unique makeup that God's given us. So, I think that's exciting. Should be exciting, not apologetic.
Yeah, you're right. It's an invitation and an opportunity. I think for too many church leaders, we talk about it as like, oh gosh, how am I going to going to bend some arms, or how am I going to kind of manipulate or coerce into having this kind of conversation, rather than actually, this is something that we get to be a part of as God is advancing his kingdom in the world. He isn't looking for participants, you know, in what he is doing in Australia and beyond, you know.
Good. I wonder too if we sometimes feel like we need to put on our leadership hat and sell a vision and try and make it like an attractive thing to give to, as if, you know, there's, you know, some, you know, business that we're trying to resource. You know, I think there's a real point in which we need to take people on the journey with us and you know, show what giving could do, and that's so important. But I think there are too many parts of the church that have been burnt by people who have put on a facade in the way they've talked about money, or the way that they've maybe spiritually connected giving to your own spiritual journey, and your own prosperity matches your faithfulness. And we're a funny church that we're standing at the crossroads of a whole bunch of usually burnt Pentecostals who have had their life dedicated to one particular church, where the vision has been so beautiful and fruitful, and their giving has been so expressly a part of their faith. And then when that's fallen apart, or maybe when that's been wielded against them, they're just broken and disillusioned, because it's not always the way of Jesus that they were giving to. And then we've got on the other side these long-term, maybe more conservative Christians who just don't ever talk about money and who don't ever hear about it. And then I'm a mark of the other third of these people who come to faith outside of a church family and just don't know anything about what it means to give and why or should. And it takes years, and sometimes it's just osmosis that leads Christians to work it out, because no one ever teaches faithfully on it. So I think the trap is we either don't talk about it, or we talk about it like the salesman trying to sell snake oil. Can we just be honest? Can we have integrity? Can we call people to a beautiful vision of the kingdom of God and a radical generosity, but also just name it when it's like, hey, our budget's struggling, and you know, if we want to continue to do this work, let's do it. I think there's a sense in which the household of God should look more like a household, less like a pyramid scheme.
Yeah. It's great, Nick. You've done a wonderful job at both summarizing and challenging the different parts of the spectrum of the church. And I actually think, you know, it's great to be able to have these honest and frank conversations about some of the kind of inhibitions that we can bring to this conversation. And I wonder, I want to dig a wee bit deeper, as you have sat around tables with people, as you've kind of done some feedback as to, and we're going to talk about the jog in just a moment, but like, what have been some of those more difficult conversations around finances that you have experienced as you have reflected and processed with people in the life of your church?
Yeah, again, there's just as many stories as there are people in some senses, but there's the way that we can quickly become defensive the minute that money comes up. And so even as we spoke about generosity through the journey, there's some that would just immediately get their sort of hackles up, you know, oh goodness, we can't talk about this in that way. And I wonder sometimes if the beauty of grace, we then want to wield it a bit like a shield to keep God at bay from him asking us to do something.
Yes.
Now, I'm not suggesting that that's everybody, but there is many conversations that I've had where I just carefully have wanted to ask, well, why is it that this is so charged for you? You know, no one's asked you for anything. We've just talked about this, you know.
Yes.
But then on the other hand, there are, as I mentioned, a lot of broken people where money and conversations of giving have been a part of their pain. And I think there's a longer story and conversation around generosity to bring healing to people. I think the biggest takeaway that I've taken is, yes, let's do things from the front, let's do things from the pulpit, let's cast vision, and let's do all of the things well. But I wonder if we need to get back to the art of shepherding people too, of sitting in front of a sheep that, you know, a soul that we've been entrusted with as church leaders, and with hopefully something of the heart of Christ, just ask some good questions that bring forth something of their heart and their story, and then meaningfully try and encourage them in that. Now that's only one piece of the puzzle, but if we're talking 20, 30, 40, 50 years of the future of the kingdom of heaven, what's the greatest investment we make? I think we're investing in individual disciples who will then hopefully disciple others with something they've found, and church cultures that have been set free from some of the poisonous stuff that we let in accidentally.
Yes.
Sheep have been led well.
Yeah. Wow. It's great. Well, I think we've made mention to and alluded and drawn this conversation out enough to go, what is this thing called the journey of generosity? Like Martine, we've made allusions to it. And of course, this is just a tool. It's not the tool, but it is a wonderful tool that church leaders and church planters and denominational leaders may choose to incorporate into the life of their church that could really help having some of these honest conversations about generosity. For those who are hearing about this for the first time, Martine, tell us what the journey of generosity is.
Yeah, great. So the journey of generosity, or JOG, as we call it for short, is it's a free discipleship tool that is for the global church to disciple their people into deeper freedom and joy and surrender to Jesus. So it's we're a non-denominational organisation, and so through this tool we have beautiful video stories from radical givers around the world living out generosity in very different ways. We have there's some scripture content and space for people to have conversations in a small group of peers around some of the story content, the scripture, and what they feel God's putting on their heart for how he might be speaking to them about their own life. And the JOG talks about generosity quite broadly, so it's not just focused on money, but it is focused on money as well. And that's really important because, Jesus talked a lot about money because it is so core to our hearts and our devotion and our treasuring of him. So in the JOG, people have time to consider how they might be able to use their time and their unique gifts and skills and the resources that God has put in their hands for his glory. And really, it's a journey. So there's different sessions in the JOG that can be done week by week, like in a Connect group that Nick was talking about at Bridge, where they ran the JOG through all of their Connect groups in over 6 weeks in term 3 last year. Or it can be done as a retreat, like a one-day retreat, or plugged into a church camp weekend. Would work really well because there's these different video stories along the way that you just press play and pause. You don't need to be trained as a leader to run the course. All of the materials are set up like the Alpha course, where really the group leader is facilitating a conversation around the content that's given to them. Yeah, and all the way there's no ask. So that's a really core part of the JOG. There's no pitch at the end or spruiking of favourite causes. That's actually not allowed to be done during the JOG.
A pledge?
A pledge. Well, actually, that people do get to work through a tool that helps them to, if they want, to make a bit of a plan for how they would live out generosity in their own life. But it's really about making a pledge to God. They don't make a pledge to us.
Yes.
That's
very good.
I wanted
Sorry,
to
Nick, you jump in, yeah.
I'm just such a big JOG fan because we did it as a staff team just because we wanted to experience it before we'd ever even thought about doing it at church. And we just found it winsome. It's biblical and it's informative, but it's just so inspiringly filled with stories and so empoweringly aimed at you as a part of the body of Christ, and just learning to discover more of who God has made you as a part of this people of God, and just saying, maybe you're the weird, quiet, introverted guy. Sorry, not weird, but just the quiet, introverted guy. No, and you've just, you've got a quiet job on the side, and you can't imagine serving up the front on a stage. But what if there was this other way that you could just harness this passion you have for young people and could turn your wealth and your life? There's just so many things that had come from it. And as a church, we've got like people coming from all sorts of places. It was just this beautiful centering moment of, let's think about this together. And the people that are teaching us aren't the leaders of this church. So when we don't like it, we can just say that. We're not going to offend anyone. And when we do like it, it's going to be inspiring. And that's great.
Yes.
So we just found it such a helpful resource.
And I think that's the thing that I've kind of, and for those who haven't gone and checked it out, like, please go and do that. Jump on the website, jump on YouTube, whatever it might be. It's ultra high quality, but I think the heart behind it that I just wanted to echo that Nick was just kind of sharing about was just really, when it comes to church planting, when it comes to advancing the kingdom in our nation, that is going to be a mobilizing of the whole church. It is going to be everyone gets to be involved, whether it be at a pioneering level, whether it be at a funding level, whether it be at a gifts and talents like Nick has just alluded to there. It actually requires the whole church in Australia to be mobilized. And so that's not necessarily the person with a microphone, but it is the person that can play a role. And I just encourage us as church leaders to just be considering those in the life of our churches that maybe haven't had the opportunity to be mobilized or to step into areas that they might be able to best serve in order to plant churches, grow churches, whatever that might be. Martine, you were going to add one more thing.
Yeah, I wanted to just share a couple of testimonials or comments that we had from people who went through the jog at Bridge. And one was that in a Connect group of around 30-year-olds, they said, oh, wow, this really opened up conversations that we'd never had as a group before and with other Christians before. In another group, there was a young woman who's been saving really hard for her first to crack into the property market, and she shared about how that had become a bit of an idol for her. And after going through the jog, she decided to try to increase her giving from 5 to 10% of her income. And she said, to my surprise, this has actually given me a lot of contentment and peace, and has allowed me to relax a bit my desire to buy property, which has been quite liberating. And another person shared he'd been a Christian for many decades now, and even though he was deeply thankful for what Jesus had done on the cross for him, he'd never made the connection between that and his giving, and that going through the jog with his friends in his Connect group helped him to understand for the first time that as Christians, giving is a natural response to what Christ has done for us on the cross. And so that's led him to increase his giving as a result and experience joy. He talked about increased joy he's receiving from his giving now.
Yes.
So they were just a few, comments which were really encouraging.
It's great. I love that. Well, hey, to draw our conversation to a close, and I always like to ask our guests, particularly as we've been talking about, all range of things that we love to talk about on the podcast, just kind of their final thoughts, hopes, particularly as we've been talking about generosity, money, the mission of God, advancing the kingdom in Australia. Just some final reflections that you might each offer. I think we'll start with Nick and then we'll finish with Martine. And we've so appreciated having you both on the podcast with us today.
Yeah, thanks, mate. I think to sort of pull some of the threads together, especially towards church planting, I just long to see the Australian church marked by the kind of culture and discipleship that people are known for their love. And people are equipped to, by the church, to see the shape of their calling, if you will, or their gifting, or the things that God has placed within them to give away in service of the gospel. We're a church where I think maybe 6 years ago we were at one campus and now we're at 4, and those things have just kind of fallen onto us. We've had a heart for church planting, but God's opened doors when we weren't ready for it and all sorts of things. And one of my biggest reflections on how God has one, kept that alive as we've continued and seen the kingdom grow there. It's been these people who are so besotted with God that they'll make ridiculous decisions in the eyes of the world to be a part of serving the kingdom. And we can't have a church planting movement that grows exponentially apart from a deep move of the Spirit in our souls towards the giving of ourselves away. And that's not going to start necessarily with the spectacular giant church that we all long to lead. Well, or maybe we shouldn't. But it's, I think, going to be the secret place, the neighborhood, the love of another when no one else can see, that will blossom into something fuller. So that's my heart. And that's what I think JOG was a big part last year of just pushing that conversation for us along. So I'd put that to anyone. If you feel stirred towards this conversation, have a look, get involved.
Yeah, I'm thinking about two pictures. One is there's one of the stories that is shared in the Journey of Generosity is called A Handful of Rice, and it tells the story of the church in Mizoram in India back in the early 1900s, who started this practice of every time they were cooking rice in a home, they would scoop out a handful of rice and place it aside as an offering to God. And that practice continued as both a spiritual practice, but also as a generosity fundraising practice for the Presbyterian Church in Mizoram, which 100 years later, 95% of Mizoram is now Christian, and they're sending out missionaries all across the world. That handful of rice has grown to raise over $25 million over that time. So, I guess that's a powerful picture of generosity shaping hearts and funding and mobilizing the church to transform a nation in an incredible way. So I'm thinking about that picture, and I'm also thinking about Paul's account of the Macedonian church in 2 Corinthians, where they were a community experiencing extreme poverty and yet pleaded for the privilege of participating in the work that God was doing and being generous. And so my heart and my prayer is that the Aussie Kiwi church would be known as churches that are living that out and in advancing the kingdom in creative, courageous ways that really just are beautiful for the rest of the world to see. No small task, hey?
I love that.
crying out to God in prayer for this.
And I can't help but think of, Mark chapter 4, where those who are good soil, that, we might reap a harvest of 30, 60, 100-fold. And that's our prayer in generosity, as you told that wonderful story of the Mizoram people here in Australia as churches are planted, and that ultimately we would see our nation reached and transformed with the good news of Jesus, which is an integral part of what it means to be generous. So, friends, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. We've loved having you. For those of you who have been piqued in curiosity around the Journey of Generosity, make sure you jump on their website, have a look. It'll also be in the show notes. Thanks so much, friends.